So this is the very final part of the conference. And the conference is the final part of the project, Hybrid Lab, that we were discussing for these 2 days. And you've heard quite a lot, I think, about that. Matej presented before the spirit of our workshops, also some cases that we worked on, some outcomes, not all of them. We'll also produce a booklet in the end, which you are invited to read. We hope it's going to be interesting and not too extensive so that you will have the energy to really get these ideas in this short package, so to say. And this is meant as a conversation. We have a special guest. This is Rona van der Zander. I will have a conversation with her first. Then I would also like to shortly speak to the representatives of all the partners of the project. So the project was actually executed by 4 partners from 4 countries: Portugal, Finland, Netherlands, and Slovenia. So, and we have representatives here. Later on, I'll give him the short time to give some final reflections. But first, I want to talk with Rona. So, as I said, this is the conference that's kind of ending event, the ending meeting of this project. We've heard 23 presentations. We had 2 roundtables with some presentations within that roundtable. So there are really many contributions, we could say. People were presenting their work, their approaches, the projects that they're working on, and some of them are close to what we've done, and some of them refer to study programs. So we were addressing STEM. So this was, I think, intensively addressed in the previous roundtable: science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I was constantly missing humanities in this package. So that's what I heard, but I wouldn't say arts is something else. Still, I mean, humanities is somewhere in between. It's kind of, it's sort of science. So I think it's kind of missing also maybe in these contributions and discussions and addressing. So for this project, Hybrid Lab, this was also very important to bring humanities also in. And I think that was also well presented before by Matej. And Laura was also summarizing what we've addressed today. I think that she did a good job. So we will touch upon a couple of topics that we already addressed. Maybe, I hope, we will open some new aspects of these topics with Rona. So as regards the STEM, I said I was missing humanities here. We've heard that maybe it would be useful to think about STEM as a kind of movement instead of methodology. So that's something maybe, Rona, you can also later reflect upon. Would you consider it as a movement, or we also heard a suggestion to think a bit about it as a sort of thinking, and then Lucas also added an important aspect of that I could say is contributed by the arts with this hands-on approach. So to really emphasize the making, the practical approach, which was also very important in this conference, and where also art connects with science and practices that we know from the laboratories. So let's begin with Rona. So it's difficult to really introduce Rona. And I think this is maybe a challenge also for this final conversation. It's interesting because you don't identify yourself by a certain discipline. So I cannot say that you are an artist very famous for this and that, or that you are a philosopher with this and that concept, or that you are a biotechnologist for something, but you're more as a kind of a motivator. You give talks, I would say, motivator for enterprises, for people like that, and you address the changing societies and how we should adjust to this situation. You lived in several countries. We also heard that before in that discussion, that this is also very important, that you live in a different environment. I was listening to your talks, and you were telling about your experience in China, which actually very well embodies what was previously described with all this uncomfortable feeling and unpleasantness and everything that comes with this unfamiliarity that you were facing, but still you decided to stay and to go on and so forth. So, and in a way, I also understood that this was a kind of a motivator for you, and that you found a way how to approach further on in your further career. So, how would you identify yourself? You write that you're a change enthusiast, so that you're interested in the future of work and education.
Yeah, thank you so much, Polona. That's a very interesting introduction already, and an interesting also observation that I don't really fit in any of these boxes. Maybe I'm already what a human will be from the future onwards, so many different things, and also not anymore so linear career path, because everything is changing so quickly and so much. Yeah, I'm very happy I'm joining you now from Germany. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person, but I followed the live stream quite a bit over the past 2 days. And I also saw that now in the last session, there were still so many questions and so much discussion. So I would love to be there in person, but I'm happy that I can join you this way in this digital age. Coming back to your question, who am I? What do I do? I have a background in business and economics and politics, so also transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary in my studies. And then I worked, as you mentioned, over the last decade in 8 different countries across the globe, from China to Australia, the United States, different European countries, with international organizations like the UN and also large corporations, looking at the future of work. So what is really happening in our workplaces? What skills do we need for that? How can we build them? And then when I returned to Germany a few years ago, I really started working intensively on these questions with universities all over Europe and also in the United States. What are the future skills we need? How can we build them? What should universities, what should higher education be there for? And this change that you mentioned a couple of times, maybe we can talk more about this as well in a minute. What is that actually, and what can we really do to adapt to that and to prepare young people, but potentially, of course, also older people, if we talk about lifelong learning, for that challenging future?
Okay, so you mentioned the notion of change, which I think is central for your work. Change, you said that you're a change enthusiast and you're addressing the changing society that we live in, that we have to face in the future, so how to adjust this changing society, so forth. But I was wondering, isn't there a paradox? Because the notion of change might refer to the notion of time and progress, which was so significant for the era of modernity, where you would have this quarrel between the ancients and the moderns, where the moderns wanted to live with time, not according to the dictate of the tradition. And then in the 19th century, following the spirit of the revolution, they also wanted to be more radical, and you would have an approach of the avant-gardes who required a change. So it was a change, a total change of society and so forth, and then the arts was also seen in that connection and so forth, but it was also meant in this more ambitious sense, so to say. And then this goes on also with the idea of the history, and that there is a spirit progressing, like in Hegel you would have this idea of spirit progressing towards the final freedom, and then these Marxist thoughts about the reaching of this final goal of the history. And then you would have in the 80s very strong debates about endings, ending of the arts, ending of the art history, but also ending of history. So there is Francis Fukuyama at that time and Arthur Dent speaking about the end of the arts, and they are speaking about the era of post-history, also Wilhelm Flusser, for instance, from Germany. So that we're not we, but at the time that there is the end of history and we're living in the era of post-history where nothing could reach this historical importance. So because it doesn't fit in this notion of the progressive time and so forth. So in a sense, nothing can really change any longer. So nothing can really bring that fundamental change or some big change that would be relevant for the society. But still, now we're speaking about constantly, rapidly changing society, which is changing so much that it never changed so much. So, I mean, how does this go together? How do you understand this change? Because you're mostly referring to working environments and how we need to adjust to maybe different economy, maybe also the means of communication, traveling, and so forth. So there are some changes. What is very new, you would say, or what is something that you would say is very significant also for the future?
Yeah, a lot of big, almost philosophical questions that you open. Yeah, I feel we could talk about this all night, and we need some red wine with it. I tried to break it down a bit to give you my perspective, and of course, always also in mind of what does this mean for education, right? Like, what does this mean also for the discussions you had the last few days when we talk about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary? Why is this even important? Why should we even consider this? So change for me, and looking at especially what is happening now, about what you just mentioned of, is there even still change happening? I would say yes, and I would be one of these persons that also says, yeah, it's happening faster than ever before, especially at an accelerated pace if we look at what this also means for the working world. So if we, for example, look at Schumpeter's innovation cycles, yeah, like back in the day, so really big waves of innovation. So for example, when we went from steam power to electricity, which changed how we work and what skills we need and how we educate ourselves a lot, we had around 50 years between an innovation wave. Now, at the moment, we're going sort of from software to AI to artificial intelligence times, and there's only 25 years between these huge innovation waves. So innovation waves have sort of halved in the last 200-300 years. And that means, of course, also for a person that is learning and that is working in this working world out there, that there's not only one innovation wave that we will experience, but 2 or 3. So that change is very real. And I always like to bring this example of my grandfather, who had one job, one profession all his life. My father had 2. I'm in my early 30s, and it's already countless. And we now know for young people that are still in school that for around 65% of them, we don't even know exactly what their jobs will be look like, what they will be doing. Yeah. So I think there we really see this accelerated pace of change. And also, if we try, of course, we often try to give names to this. So many of you have probably already heard about VUCA world, so that our world is very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And at the moment, and that is almost, I want to say, a bit worrying, or something that I also research and think a lot about. How do we react to this, especially also as places of education? We arrived in the BANI world, yeah, which stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and almost incomprehensible. So everything has become so intertwined and interconnected and changing at a very quick pace that of course has a huge impact also on us, how we work, how we learn, what we do. And the last word to that, when it then comes to education and also to inter and transdisciplinary thoughts and how we organize that, the panel earlier started exactly with that, talking about our world has become so global, so globalized, so complex, that we can't look at the challenges in isolation anymore. If we want to find answers to things that we have to tackle these days, climate change was the example, but of course we see that in many different settings, we really have to think transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, cross-cultural about these challenges. So there's a lot in it, but I think, yes, change is happening at an accelerated pace, especially now if we look at the last 200-300 years, and if we look at also what does this mean for the working world, that has an impact on how we study, how we learn. And that then also means that we have to think of how do we prepare people, society for that, and what does this also mean for our places of learning.
Okay, so now you touched many topics that I want to discuss a little bit more. So you said interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, which was also very much important until now. But we also saw that there are many aspects that we have to pay attention to that. So it's not that easy. We can say we're very enthusiastic, it's very good. This project was perfect because we came together and we really not only bring together disciplines, but we really did this kind of mixing, and it was transdisciplinary and so forth. But in reality, don't we lose something with going completely into this transdisciplinarity, in the sense of not maybe paying that much attention to the knowledge, to the practices, the training and so forth that one needs if one wants to be really good, very professional in a discipline? That's something that is, for instance, if you want to be professional in a certain discipline, you really have to take years, not only 1 week as we did here, for instance, and at I3S at the workshop. I don't consider myself a biotechnologist, for instance, because I did that training, let's say so. So if you still want to be a professional, and of course we would need that kind of professional, still probably agree, then there is a problem how to really reach this level of transdisciplinarity. And we also heard another problem just recently in that roundtable, which is about financing this transdisciplinarity, which I think has to do with the reviewers which are rooted in disciplines. So if there is one who is rooted in a discipline, he's very, maybe, I mean, or my experience is also with the reviewers, they're very intolerant towards other disciplines and some kind of mixing and opening and so forth. So, which is an obstacle for financing a transdisciplinary projects. So, the future and the transdisciplinarity, we were also, we use the term comfort zone, so that you are in a comfort zone if you are within a discipline, because you get through this training, you get the knowledge, and you start to feel comfortable with that. It was also a dialect that was mentioned, or if you go through these ethnographic studies, there would be a whole culture that you belong to if you are a scientist of certain disciplines. So you feel safe in that. If you want to go into transdisciplinarity, it's an unsafe situation. You are risking. That's also one thing that I was thinking, and it was exactly mentioned before. So it's a sort of risk to go out and to start swimming where you cannot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's, of course, very much now we're talking, let's say, in our university bubble, in a way, I guess, you know, where often, I mean, I'm often a little bit more outside. And then when I come in, I'm sometimes even amazed how even in the same discipline, the different sub-disciplines, you know, argue about who's right or how do we fit together. So, of course, there's a lot to it. And I agree also with the aspect of the challenge of becoming very good at something. And I also, I'm not sure if we have the final answer yet, but my point would also not be to just, work transdisciplinary and open everything up very much. I think there is a good reason for having disciplines and also really researching in depth in these different disciplines. But coming together, maybe also project-based, I mean, like you guys did now, and even opening up for different aspects and different perspectives, I think that is so worthwhile. So if we take different challenges or different projects and say, okay, let's think about this transdisciplinary, I think there is a huge value in that, and that is happening more and more, and that people are open to this. I think that's very important. And of course, depending on which level of education we look at, I think we should practice that also much earlier. So for example, in schools, we're not discipline focused maybe, but very subject focused, right? And also they're taking projects and saying, okay, what answers do we actually need? What people do we need to bring together to understand this matter better? I think that is something that is super important for the future.
You now mentioned the university system or the higher education system or educational system, also the primary schools and so forth, and transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. So, or you, I think in one of your talks even said that a university has to change because the way how it distributes the knowledge and training is not appropriate. So maybe you can reflect a little bit more about this idea. So now we are talking about interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity at universities, and we see that there are really different systems. In the previous roundtable, it was addressed that some students can have experiences from different, or that it would be very welcome, not only to have a course at another faculty and to completely different discipline, but to go maybe there and study a while in that. When I was a guest professor in the United States, I saw that students were studying like that, like you would have students from legal studies and from very different backgrounds, and they would come to listen to this media theory and so forth. So it's something that is more familiar there that, for instance, with this Bologna system that we have, where we offer courses from other disciplines, but it's not really the practice. Students would rather go into their direction and so forth. So what to do and how to implement that, or is it possible, or is it good to implement it, or in the early stage, or maybe it's better to first form the disciplines and then, so to first build the disciplines and then to dissolve them? in the higher levels?
Yeah, dissolve is maybe, yeah, I don't know if that is maybe even too much, but I think building a discipline, also a certain thinking of a certain matter, and then opening that up, I think is something that is the approach that I would go with, and that I think is very worthwhile. You mentioned something about, yeah, what I think about higher education and so on, and we're of course now discussing a lot this interdisciplinary topic, which I think is very important. But for me, it's even a bigger question that I might throw in, because you also mentioned Bologna just now, and how education works now here, higher education in Europe. And for me, many days, the question is even bigger from, yeah, what should we change and how, but what for? So also when we think of transdisciplinary, for me, the question is, what is university there for? What are we actually trying to do here? Yeah. So are we preparing young people primarily now for the working force? So should they go out and be fit to work in a certain discipline? Are we here to research? And I can, of course, speak very much from the German perspective, where also teaching is not very important in university. It's important to research, right, to publish, but not necessarily to be a good teacher, let's say, so to pass on the skills in a extraordinary way, let's say. So what are we doing, and can we maybe, and would one approach maybe also to detach these two things, like the teaching, and okay, I have these people, they want to come to university, they want to learn about a certain aspect, they want to get a degree as well, right? And also earlier I heard this, like, yeah, you know, they're all customers now, and we have no time and money, so that has changed a lot as well. So are they here to get a degree, to go out into the workforce, to be fit for working, or are they here to research? Or is that maybe things that we should see separate as well at different stages? And then from them, also draw conclusions on how we go about the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary thing, on what is our end goal, right? If they want to work in a certain workforce with the skills that they acquire through university, how could we organize that? Versus if we're researching, how can we then bring this research power together from different disciplines? So for me, that is something that I'm also discussing a lot and thinking a lot about, because of course, especially through Bologna, as you just mentioned, university has changed a lot. How we work and teach and everything has changed a lot. And sometimes I'm still not 100% sure what the end goal is.
Yeah, these are big questions, like what do we need university for? I think that you addressed it in one of your lectures, so that you had some data about the future working positions, future jobs. There was very high percentage of people that will get employed in such spaces, I mean, that they will do such jobs that don't exist today. So how to prepare them? If you write a curriculum within this Bologna system, you have to also write, they will get employed here and here and here. And you also have to promote that constantly, so that people say, okay, when I do that, so that they feel comfortable actually. When I'll do this study, then in the end, I will get this employment. But how, if in this 5 years or maybe 10, these jobs will maybe not exist, or there will be others, and are we preparing people for this future?
Not ideal yet, I would say, but I think it's a challenge that's up on all of us, and that we're all, I mean, again, you guys now there the last few days in this conference, and of course we're all thinking of how can we change, how can we make it better? And I think it's a huge challenge, like I said in the beginning, because of this incredible change that we're also seeing at the moment, and that also jobs, professions, and knowledge is also updated so quickly, right? Of course, this depends again on the discipline, how long it lasts, but the halftime of knowledge, the more specific it gets, is also decreasing so quickly, because things keep changing so quickly. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that we have to take into consideration there. And I think this general understanding, one colleague earlier, she said, we should teach them to think, or the idea is that you come to university and you learn how to think. And I think that is one of the key things, that we really train this. You also had the 4 C's up earlier. I think communication, critical thinking, collaboration, that is so important for the future, and really seeing how can we incorporate that, how can we foster that, because the actual content, and of course it's still a lot about exams, about credit points and all that. I mean, that's a whole nother story to it, but and challenges. But how can we really foster this critical thinking, this understanding, and also this coping with change? Because I really think if we talk about Bani world, that people are anxious that this non-linear, incomprehensible world is also a huge challenge. So my grandfather, like I said, he had his one job his whole life. He studied for it. He worked in it. It changed a little bit here and there, but that was basically what he did. And now we are in this very digitized, complex world, and that's not always easy. So I think also preparing for that in the sense that I learn how to cope with it, that I know what I'm good at, that I'm confident with my skills, that I'm able to adapt, something that is so critical for the future.
Yeah, maybe as you said, thinking approach and research, being open in the sense that you don't really build archives from students, but that you rather build kind of curious individuals who are able to connect and to really open maybe new opportunities.
And that's also, sorry, just one sentence on that. That's why I also think this research aspect is so important in a way, you know, to also now these days, what is true? Yeah. What fake news. I mean, it's like, you know, yeah, fake news, but really we have fake news now that even as a well-studied researched person are hard to identify. So how do we cope with that? Yeah. Like, how do we really implement these aspects as well of researching, of critical questioning, of understanding what is happening out there. So I think that aspect is important. But of course, becoming a researcher, many of you know better than I do, it's a very different thing than if I want to go afterwards and work in a company. Yeah, I need different skills. So how can we bridge these two aspects that are important in university as well? Or how can we maybe also separate parts of it? I think is an interesting question as well to look at.
There's one more point that I want to address in this conversation with you, and that is the online education or online collaborations, because of course we just had this COVID period, and maybe it will return. So it's a reality that we experienced, and maybe it's a reality that we will have to face with again, or maybe we profited something in the sense that we say, okay, we got some experiences that were really good, and there are some advantages that we will use in the future. We also discussed that here at this conference and in the hybrid lab, because half of the workshops took place online. And they were very successful in the senses that we couldn't imagine before, because we didn't have this experience. We were a bit afraid of that, but it was very, I mean, it came out well. It was okay. Still, on the other hand, as we heard before, for Erasmus program in particular, it's very important that people travel, that they come to different cultures, that they experience different worlds, that they come in contact with people, and so forth. And this is also, of course, very important for these workshops that we had, that we were alive, that we were in real physical contact, and that we did things in, so as Lucas says, hands-on. So these differences between online and physical attendance and practice, and the future of work also, and teaching and learning, because I think I found or heard in one of your lectures that you said that you were kind of enthusiastic about this online collaboration, that you were working in a group, and there were computer scientists, and they said, okay, we are very much used to working online. We don't meet physically. And you said, that's really good because I can stay at home and so forth.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, yeah, there are two aspects to it. And I think that we need both. We need the real world. I mean, we are still proper 3D human beings that we can touch each other, and we will have a very different experience in person than we have digitally. So what you guys are experiencing there now in Porto, the conversations you are having over coffee, you're going out at night, you're having this conference in person. I'm very happy I can join digitally now, because that's better than nothing, but it's never the same experience. And I would say it's also never as good as being there in person. Still, technology might also change that. I mean, we're already talking about metaverse. We have already a very incredible virtual experiences as well. So maybe in the future, yes, we will put glasses on and we will really almost feel like we're in the same room, and maybe even in a better room, maybe. But talking about today, now where we are, I would say yes, the experience in person is super important. And also that is how learning happens. That's how discussion happens. That's how we build trust. And I'm also teaching a lot myself, and I've of course also experienced the last 2 years, like you have these students that wanted to go to Paris from all over the world to study there, to sit under the Eiffel Tower, to eat croissant, to fall in love. They were sitting somewhere in their parents' living room doing online lectures. And of course, this was very far from the experience, like you said, about Erasmus, that they would have had, because it's of course not only about the content that I could deliver very well also online, but of course there's so much more to this cultural experience and so on. So I think, yes, we need that. And I also think a campus in the future should still be there as a physical place to meet, to exchange, to drink and eat together. But at the same time, the online world is there. People will work digitally. There's no question about it. So I think it's dangerous now to say, okay, we go back in person, and that we all don't want that. It's not important, because I also run a company. I hire students, and I often see that digital communication, digital collaboration, they are not used to it. They haven't really learned it. They're not, they haven't practiced it. So I very strongly believe that we also have to integrate this into our education system, to train that, to learn that, so that people feel comfortable. And I mean, I still see it now these days. I have 20 students, no one switches the camera on. Yeah, why is that? Like, why don't we feel comfortable in the digital space? How can we work on that? I mean, that's just, of course, one very small example, but things like that. So I think it needs to be part of it. We need to work with it, because that will be the future, especially if we talk about young people, of course, that we are now teaching, training. That's the world they will go into. So it needs to be part of it. And with that, we, of course, also have to think of how might our campus then change? What do we need? Also, if we want to do hybrid sessions, what does this mean for the physical space that we need in, and what can a campus then offer, maybe also differently in the future?
Okay, thank you, Rona. Now I would like
Thank
to
you.
address my colleagues in this crime of the hybrid lab. They are very tired, I see, because they
Oh,
all
no.
did their very good job during these 2 days, and I'm only now in this moment functionally involved in this panel. But because it's the ending of the, not of the project, as Julio said, because we still have to work on some things, so we still have some work, but it's the ending of these meetings and this event that is taking place also here in these 2 days. And thanks very much, Julio and I3S, for hosting us here. It was really, really nice. So I would like to address this, of course, very important question. So what did you learn, and how will you implement what you've learned in this project in the practice that you will practice when you return? So in the education, you're all involved in different sorts of educations. So maybe Lucas first, you are not coming from the higher education institution, but I would say that what you do, what WAAG Society does, is rather kind of building responsible citizens, maybe because you are involving wider public. They can attend your workshops. Sometimes you're working on the edge with some ethical issues, because you think that it's very important that people think about the important things of tomorrow by themselves, and not just let them to the politicians to decide. Am I right? So that's kind of more my understanding. And art is also very important element in that, as well as other, of course, sciences and so forth, other disciplines, so that you're really merging these disciplines in your practice. So you're establishing Biohack Academy, and this is something that already started. Maybe you can tell us a bit more. I know that you presented it, but you did it very shortly in 2 sentences or something. So how would you implement what you've learned here, or the experiences that you've got here in this project to the Biohack Academy, or maybe other things that WAAG Society is doing?
You already made a very good and concise summary of what we do. I as well want to thank I3S, but also you, ALMA MATER, and AALTO University of the Arts for this fantastic collaboration. It was a very diverse project, and therefore I come back to the dean of this university that just said that STEAM is something that is a movement, an attitude. If we stick to trying to define it, we may lose what it brings us. In that sense, I learned a lot in the diversity of the project. Yet that is also something that is part of a continuum, because we didn't come together out of the blue. We were already partners that had some knowledge about what we were doing, so there was a lot of complementarity. The part of WAAG within Hybrid Lab Network was looking at biotechnologies and creating, let's say, hands-on imaginaries of these biotechnologies, because we think it is important to equip also creative people with what is happening in biotechnology, life sciences, in order to bring that to society. Hence also my question again to the previous panel about the importance of making and thinking through making. At the same time, if you relate that to questions about work, I think it is very important to share something that I learned from another project that started with the title Critical Making, but we changed it into Making Matters, where we had a lecture where it was expressed that it's very important to teach people how to do things, not only the transdisciplinarity here within academia, but also sort of create situations where that transdisciplinary learnings go to citizens. We work with citizens a lot, and they should also learn a lot about technologies by being able to touch these technologies, even as far as technologies that come from the lab, such as the applications of CRISPR technique. It's very interesting to teach people these critical skills, but it's also very important to see where our society is, because if you teach people to have critical skills, you also should have a society that enables these to be applied by citizens. So if you have lesser public space, if you have lesser money for education, if you have all sorts of limits to what citizens can do, then you have a situation where it's not about critical making, but it's about where making becomes critical. So if the possibilities of making are limited, what are we teaching them? Also in the frame of larger challenges of climate change, but also social issues in our society with intersectionality, inclusion, etc. That is something actually that we should also have addressed more in this STEAM project, I would say. Very practically, what I'm going to do with what we learned working with these very specific life sciences laboratory techniques, I would love to bring that further and work with more artists to enable them to work with these technologies, because they are still not everywhere as accessible for creatives as you would like them to be, in order to create better imagination about what these technologies mean for society, what they do, and foremost also what they cannot do.